A legend began long ago in the lush central Italian countryside, close to the banks of the meandering Tiber River. Innumerable communities were scattered over the verdant hills and valleys of the Latium area in the 7th century BC. Rome. One of the greatest civilizations in history will emerge from these little towns. Romulus and Remus, twin brothers, are the tranquil beginning of the tale of Rome. Their birth was associated with both divinity and monarchy, according to ancient historians like as Plutarch and Livy. A furious monarch made their mother Rhea Silvia, a princess of Alba Longa, a Vestal virgin, a priestess prohibited from bearing children. However, according to tradition, the twins were produced from this coupling when the deity Mars paid her a covert visit. The current monarch perceived the infants as a challenge to his authority when he found out about them. He gave the order to leave them, put them in a reed basket, and let them float on the Tiber's gentle currents. The basket moved silently downstream under a moonlight sky, maybe due to fate rather than human intervention. The basket eventually settled gently in reeds close to the Palatine Hill, one of the well-known 7 hills of Rome. Here, a woman wolf, not a human, heard the screams of the infants beneath old trees whose branches rustled peacefully in the night wind. The wolf, attracted by instinct, approached the twins warily, understanding that they were not prey, but rather animals in need of defense. She raised Romulus and Remus in a peaceful cave beneath the Palatine, protecting them until the cunning shepherd Faustulus found them. The brothers were brought up with love and consideration by Faustulus and his wife, Acca Laurentia. Romulus and Remus gained the esteem of the local shepherds and peasants as they grew up. They were remarkable young men because of their innate charm, courage, and leadership. As they grew older, though their goals expanded beyond caring for sheep, they envisioned creating a metropolis that would last a lifetime. However, their divergent perspectives quickly caused them to clash. Because he thought it was in divine favor, Romulus supported the establishment of a city on the Palatine Hill where they were saved. Remus thought that the adjacent Aventine Hill offered more benefits and security, therefore, he chose it. Unable to settle their disagreement, they resorted to an antiquated practice known as augury, which involves interpreting divine intent by observing birds. When Remus first noticed 6 vultures, he took it as a sign. Shortly thereafter, however, Romulus saw 12, which he saw as even more heavenly approbation. Tension increased because neither brother would give in. Romulus started building simple walls around the Palatine because he was determined to go forward. Perhaps amused or bitter, Remus jumped over the recently constructed barriers to make fun of his brother's efforts and their lowly origins. In a terrible moment, Remus was struck down by Romulus, or one of his supporters, who were incensed by this insult. The city's foundation was permanently marked by this unexpected act of violence and tragedy, serving as a sobering reminder of the human cost of ambition. Sad and remorseful Romulus grieved deeply and buried Remus with dignity. He made the decision to govern sensibly, convinced that the city of their dreams would triumph over sorrow. Rome was thus founded on that day of bittersweetness. Romulus stood alone on the Palatine Hill after the terrible death of Remus, confronting the difficult task of constructing the city that he and his brother had once dreamed of together. Around July, He carefully erected the foundations of Rome, laying stones with profound regard and firm purpose, determined to realize this common ideal. Rome started off as a small community under Romulus's leadership. Shepherds, farmers, outcasts, and explorers from nearby towns and tribes were among the first people to live in the city. Romulus steadily expanded the city's little population by welcoming everyone who was looking for safety, security, and a new start. Rome swiftly developed into a haven for those escaping persecution and poverty, where the prospect of a brighter future was more important than one's past. Romulus created the Senate, Rome's first government, after realizing the need of maintaining order. He chose a group of well-respected men from well-known families, elders who would balance his leadership and offer sage advice. By guiding decisions, resolving disputes, and upholding the common good, the Senate laid the groundwork for future generations of Roman rule. Romulus established Rome's first armed units to defend the young city from danger. He arranged troops into units called legions because he understood the value of power and solidarity. During their rigorous training, these early Roman soldiers learned self-control, cooperation, and communal loyalty. Serving in the military under Romulus involved more than just combat. It stood for responsibility, citizenship, and a sense of community. Rome, under Romulus, also needed limits and regulations. In order to demonstrate Rome's increasing might and the gravity of his mission, he erected defensive walls and gates around the city. However, he also understood the value of rites, rituals, and customs in keeping his people together. By integrating religious ceremonies and celebrations into daily life, Rome's populace was rooted in common experiences and strengthened their bonds with their gods and one another. Rome, however, had early difficulties. Since there weren't many women among the first people to settle in Rome, Romulus understood that family life and growth were essential to the city's destiny. In an effort to promote harmony and marital partnerships, he reportedly planned a celebration and invited nearby Sabine tribes. However, Romulus permitted the Romans to kidnap Sabine women during the festivities when attempts at marriage arrangements failed. This incident is known as the abduction of the Sabine women. Despite igniting anger, at first the crisis ended in peace and integration, bringing the two peoples together and boosting Rome's stability and population. Romulus continued to lead with compassion and drive as Rome took form. He frequently strolled among his people, conversing with them and learning about their dreams, anxieties, and hardships. Not just because he established their city, but also because he governed with justice, knowledge, and an openness to development and change. The populace grew to greatly adore Romulus. As the years went by, Rome's power steadily grew, rooted in its core values of responsibility, community, and selflessness. The united, safe city that Romulus had envisioned was now a reality. He carried his brother's memory with him as a silent lesson of humility, compassion, and the high cost of leadership. But he never forgot Remus. Thus, Rome gradually ascended from tragedy to glory under the careful eye of its creator, setting the stage for millennia of untold history. Rome was apprehensive about its future following Romulus's enigmatic abduction in July, which is generally attributed to a storm in which he was dragged away by heavenly powers according to mythology. The Romans relied on their trusted Senate to keep things stable, and they chose Numa Pompilius, a calm and sensible man, to be the city's second ruler. Throughout Rome, Numa Pompilius was regarded as a wise and spiritual leader, rather than a warrior or conqueror. Numa, who was revered for his gentle demeanor and profound insight, was born in the nearby Sabine area. During his rule, the military underpinnings of Romulus underwent a dramatic change, giving way to a time centered on civic order, culture, and religion. Rome developed into a metropolis of customs and religious rituals under Numa's leadership. He founded significant temples, priesthoods, and religious organizations that grew to be essential to Roman society. By carefully lining up the months and days with the cycles of nature, Numa is credited with developing the Roman calendar, which brought order and harmony to daily life. He pushed for citizens to work together peacefully and to settle disagreements amicably rather than violently. Around June, Numa's tranquil rule came to an end, and Tullus Hostilius became the third king of Rome. Tullus was more ambitious and aggressive than his predecessor. He aimed to increase Rome's might and sway because he thought that conquest and military triumph were the keys to power. Rome fought wars with nearby cities like Alba Longa under Tullus. Rome grew as a result of these battles, but the hardship and tension among its citizens also rose. Building on the foundations laid by Romulus and Numa, Tullus fortified Rome in spite of his military strategy. He solidified Rome's position as a regional power by enlarging its realm and sphere of influence. But his rule came to a quick end when, according to tradition, he was struck by lightning, which was seen as divine retribution for his disregard for Numa's set religious rites and obligations. Around June, Ancus Marcius succeeded Tullus as the fourth king of Rome. Ancus was a knowledgeable leader who was renowned for striking a careful balance between military might and sound government. Ancus built the Ponte Subitius, Rome's first significant bridge over the Tiber River. After realizing the importance of infrastructure, this essential framework promoted travel, trade, and communication, tying Rome's expanding lands together. By constructing strong walls and a port at Ostia, which would serve as the city's vital connection to the Mediterranean Sea, Ancus also fortified Rome's defenses. Rome's economy and power were able to grow as a result of these deliberate changes. Roman residents enjoyed stability and prosperity during Ancus's rule, which was characterized by measured acts and balanced leadership. Rome's character changed with each ruler, molded by a deliberate fusion of might, ambition, intelligence, and cultural development. From its modest beginnings, the city that Romulus established had developed into a thriving, multicultural town. Its residents shared a sense of purpose and destiny, in addition to living within safe walls. These early monarchs had a significant impact on the city's foundations, ideals, and customs as Rome approached the end of the monarchy. Rome was now in a strong position for its upcoming chapter, which would tell a tale of tenacity, aspiration, and the intricate relationship between wisdom and power. Rome's monarchy persisted, and the city was governed by people who brought both development and strife. Around June, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus succeeded Ancus Marcius as the fifth king of Rome. Tarquin the Elder was initially an Etruscan from a strong northern culture that had a significant impact on Rome. Enthusiastic and ambitious, Tarquin ushered in a period of important civic and architectural advancement. Tarquin established large-scale public works projects, including public squares, temples, and the well-known Circus Maximus, Rome's enormous chariot racing stadium. In order to maintain the cleanliness and health of the growing city, He also started the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's extensive sewer system. Rome became increasingly affluent, successful, and culturally advanced under his reign. Around May of Tarquin's death, Rome's sixth king, Servius Tullius, came to power. Servius was seen as a king who was fair and reform-minded. By instituting a census system that categorized people according to their level of income, rather than only their familial ancestry, he changed the social structure of Rome. Greater equality was brought about by this system, which also made it possible for more citizens to participate and helped bring Rome's expanding varied populace together. Additionally, Servius fortified Rome's fortifications by enlarging the city walls to accommodate its burgeoning populace. These Servian walls, which delineated Rome's borders and mirrored the city's newly discovered unity and identity, came to represent the tenacity of the Roman people. However, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, often known as Tarquin the Proud, would turn out to be a divisive and despotic leader as Rome's last monarch. Tarquin controlled Rome with force rather than wisdom, disregarding the Senate and repressing citizens' liberties after ascending to the throne by betrayal, brutality, and conspiracy. He started expensive wars and ostentatious projects burdening the people of Rome, who became more and more dissatisfied of his tyrannical reign. When Sextus Tarquinius Tarquin's son violently attacked Lucretia, a noblewoman, in May, it was the decisive moment. The Roman nobles, under the leadership of Lucius Junius Brutus, rebelled against the emperor in outrage at this injustice. With a promise that Rome would never again be governed by a monarch, Brutus rallied the Romans and drove Tarquin the Proud and his family out. Rome's monarchy came to a formal end with Tarquin's banishment, and a republican governmental structure took its place. Under the Republic, elected magistrates, most notably 2 consuls selected annually, would rule Rome. In order to avoid the tyranny Rome had experienced during Tarquin's leadership, this structure guaranteed shared authority and restricted power. A major turning point was the founding of the Roman Republic. It moved the balance of power from absolute rulers to elected officials and public involvement. The Senate of Rome regained its prominence as the main legislative body, directing laws, policies, and choices based on group intelligence rather than personal desire. Rome was about to enter its most ambitious era to date. After learning harsh lessons about justice, balance, and government, the city, once a little town situated atop 7 hills, had grown into a regional power. With the kings at their side, the Romans welcomed the Republic with cautious optimism, prepared to take on new chances and challenges, and sure that their common values of justice, liberty, and civic responsibility would guide them into a bright future. Rome was at a turning point in its history when Tarquin was banished and the monarchy was dissolved. To stop the abuses of power they had experienced under the monarchs, the Romans instituted the Republic in May, a revolutionary experiment in administration. The principles of shared leadership, group accountability, and a system of checks and balances that would govern Rome for centuries were at the heart of the new political system. Every year, voters chose 2 consuls to hold the highest positions in the Republic. In order to prevent any one person from gaining total authority, these consuls shared executive power and collaborated when making decisions on administration, war, and peace. The Senate, a strong body of Roman aristocrats who counseled, discussed, and formulated the policies that would direct the fledgling republic, was present alongside the consuls. It was not long before the nation faced one of its first major tests. In order to reclaim Rome by force, the exiled Tarquin turned to nearby Etruscan communities for support. The Republic responded by mobilizing its populace to protect their newly acquired liberty. Around April, Tarquin's allies were soundly crushed by Roman soldiers at the Battle of Lake Regillus, securing Rome's independence and solidifying the Republic's early foundations. Now that the threat of monarchy had been eliminated, Rome started to grow gradually. The Republic swiftly acquired neighboring lands by providing defeated peoples with protection under Roman law and restricted citizenship privileges, rather than by engaging in rash aggression. The basis for a stable, expanding society bound by common interests rather than fear was laid by this approach, which fostered loyalty rather than hatred among newcomers. Internal disputes also emerged as the Republic grew, especially between the two main social classes in Rome, the plebeians and the patricians. Rich landowner families with a long history of influence and authority were known as patricians. Originally, having little influence over Rome's governance, plebeians included common people, farmers, tradesmen, and artisans. Plebeians eventually called for more rights representation and equity. Known as the Fight of the Orders, this war raged for almost 2 centuries. Plebeians finally gained important privileges, such as the creation of their own elected representatives, known as tribunes, via tenacious lobbying. All Roman people were treated fairly and represented by these tribunes, which shielded the plebeians against unfair legislation or abuses by patrician magistrates. The development of Rome's first written legal code, known as the 12 Tables, which was put into effect in April, was one important result of this debate. Transparency, justice, and stability were brought about by these laws, which spelled out citizens' rights and obligations in detail. Publicly displayed in Rome's Forum, the 12 Tables became the foundation of Roman law, impacting innumerable generations and establishing norms for legal systems beyond time. During these early years of the Republic, Rome's economy was booming. As trade networks grew, commodities from all across Italy and the Mediterranean area entered Rome's busy marketplaces. Roads, aqueducts, and public buildings were among the many infrastructure improvements that allowed Rome to support its expanding economy and population. The Republic's novel form of government proved incredibly robust and flexible in spite of internal conflicts and sporadic setbacks. Romans loved their civic responsibilities, from serving in the military to attending public gatherings, and they knew that responsible and active citizenship was what made the Republic strong. As a result, Rome gradually evolved from a little city-state into a powerful, prosperous republic. Aware of their past and dedicated to the principles that characterized their distinct position in the ancient world, the Roman people confronted the future with confidence under the careful balancing act of consulship, Senate supervision, and citizen engagement. Rome's territory grew considerably as the Roman Republic persisted into the 4th and 3rd century BC, becoming a dominant force in the Mediterranean. Military might was not the only factor in this growth. It resulted from Rome's special fusion of strategic warfare alliances and diplomacy. The Gauls, ferocious northern warriors who attacked and took Rome in March, were one of the Republic's first threats. Ancient historians claim that the Gauls famously invaded and pillaged Rome, destroying the city in the process. Resilient and resolute, the Romans swiftly rebuilt their city with stronger fortifications, promising never to experience such humiliation again. Rome improved its legions by stressing rigorous training organization and loyalty after learning from this painful experience. The Roman army developed into one of the most formidable combatants in antiquity. Armed with strong shields and short swords, soldiers known as legionaries fought in close order and shown incredible discipline despite overwhelming odds. Rome recovered gradually after the Gallic invasion and started to impose its will over central Italy. It accomplished this by combining judicious diplomacy with forceful military operations. Recognizing that collaboration with Rome provided security stability and economic opportunity, nearby tribes and city-states frequently, willingly formed alliances. The fights against the Samnites, a tough tribe who lived in the hilly areas of central Italy, were one of the period's most notable conflicts. Rome fought the Samnite Wars, a difficult sequence of battles and sieges from March 1943 to February. Despite their difficulties, these battles eventually led to Rome's triumph, which greatly expanded the Republic's resources and manpower while granting it sovereignty over large swaths of the Italian peninsula. However, Rome's supremacy was put to the test, again, most notably by the Greek towns in southern Italy. Pyrrhus of Epirus, a Greek ruler, sent skilled soldiers, elephants, and sophisticated strategies to Italy in February. At first, Pyrrhus severely defeated the Roman soldiers, but even though he prevailed in combat, his gains were expensive and short-lived, which is how the phrase Pyrrhic victory originated. Pyrrhus was ultimately driven out by Rome's tenacity and strategic perseverance, solidifying Roman rule over southern Italy. Rome built a vast road network as the Republic grew, the most well-known of which was the Appian Way, which passed through Appia and was finished in March. These roads, which were mostly constructed for military use, allowed for quick troop deployments and logistical assistance. However, they also increased trade and commerce by bringing Italian cities together and promoting economic and cultural interchange. Rome's growth extended beyond its borders. The Republic also changed politically. The balance of power between the plebeian and aristocratic groups gradually improved. In order to ensure more representation and involvement in administration, plebeians were granted the ability to occupy higher public positions, such as the consulship. Rome's internal cohesion and social stability were further reinforced by this development. Rome was the leading force in Italy by the middle of the 3rd century BC. Its residents had stability, wealth, and a sense of pride in their shared identity. The city itself flourished, drawing artists, intellectuals, and traders from all across the Mediterranean. But Rome's aspirations were far from finished. Carthage, a prosperous Phoenician city-state situated in North Africa, was located to the south and possessed a strong marine empire. Tensions and rivalries between these two emerging empires would eventually result in the Punic Wars, one of the most fabled battles in antiquity. Rome, knowing that its destiny as a great power was only getting started, was poised for the chances and challenges that lay ahead, confident yet wary. The Roman Republic had solidified its position as the supreme authority on the Italian peninsula by the middle of the 3rd century BC. But Carthage, another great empire across the Mediterranean Sea in North Africa, was a fierce opponent. Carthage had a strong maritime fleet, was affluent, and was powerful. Rome and Carthage would inevitably clash. The Punic Wars, three major confrontations that would shape the destiny of both civilizations began when it finally erupted in February. Control of Sicily, a strategically significant island at the intersection of Mediterranean trade routes, was at the center of the First Punic War, which lasted until February 24th. Rome soon saw that a powerful navy was necessary to confront Carthage. Rome was historically a land-based power with limited naval expertise. However, the Romans quickly adjusted, creating fleets based on Carthaginian ships that had been seized and creating novel naval strategies like the corvus, a boarding bridge that allowed Roman soldiers to engage in hand-to-hand battle at water. Rome persevered, despite suffering significant losses, and it finally paid off. Carthage was vanquished, following 23 years of exhausting combat. The Republic took the first step toward becoming an empire when Rome conquered Sicily, its first foreign colony. Although Carthage had to make large reparations, both parties were aware that their conflict was far from over. An even bigger obstacle arose during the Second Punic War, which lasted from 218 to 221 BC, when Hannibal Barca, the greatest commander of Carthage, began an ambitious invasion of Italy. In what is regarded as one of the most audacious military operations in history, Hannibal marched his army, which included war elephants over the perilous Alps, into Roman territory. Roman soldiers were severely defeated by Hannibal's army, most notably at Cannae and Lake Trasimene. Hannibal surrounded and essentially destroyed a far bigger Roman army at Cannae in February. This fight is still regarded as a masterwork of military planning. Rome, however, refused to give up in spite of these terrible losses. Rather, Roman leaders Fabius Maximus in particular adopted careful tactics, avoiding direct combat and progressively undermining Hannibal's supply routes. Hannibal spent years in isolation and growing helpless in Italy after failing to overthrow Rome itself. In the meantime, Rome launched a frontal assault on Carthage, with troops led by Publius Cornelius Scipio, a talented general who would go on to become Scipio Africanus. Recalled to protect his nation, Hannibal was soundly beaten by Scipio in the pivotal Battle of Zama in February. Carthage once more gave up, losing much of its strength, a sizable portion of its land and its navy. The Third Punic War, which lasted until January, was short but terrible. Rome aimed to put a stop to its competitor once and for all, because it was still concerned about Carthage's possible comeback. Carthage was completely destroyed during a siege that lasted for several years. Famously, the Romans destroyed the city and salted its fields, leaving only ruins in their wake. With the fall of Carthage, Rome's hegemony over the Mediterranean was uncontested. The Punic Wars had a profound impact on Rome. They enhanced the Republic's economy, increased its territory, fortified its military, and transformed it into a major Mediterranean force. However, the conflicts also brought with them new difficulties, internal strife, and ambitious generals whose influence jeopardized the Republic's fragile equilibrium. After Carthage was vanquished, Rome entered a new era, marked by unheard-of levels of riches, sophistication, and growth. However, internal strife would soon sprout from the Republic's prosperity, putting Rome on course for its most violent and revolutionary century to date. Rome remained the most powerful city in the Mediterranean after the Punic Wars. With the Roman conquest of vast swaths of area from Spain to Greece, the Republic was enriched with resources, riches, and land. However, this achievement brought up significant internal problems that changed Rome in ways that its founders could not have predicted. Soldiers found their little farms in ruins when they returned from combat. Many soldiers sold their property and fell into poverty and misery because they were unable to compete with wealthy senators who possessed enormous estates that were tended by enslaved peoples. Veterans and displaced farmers crowded the streets, becoming a restless underclass, enraged by their degraded position. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, two brothers from a well-known family, were defenders of the common people in the face of increasing inequality. Tiberius Gracchus, who promoted measures to divide public land to poor residents, was appointed a tribune in January. The Senate was deeply divided as a result of his ideas, which endangered the riches and power of the elite. A gang of senators tragically killed Tiberius, a startling act of political violence that defied long-standing Roman conventions. Gaius Gracchus, his brother, carried up the cause 10 years later. Gaius suggested more extensive reforms, such as increased citizenship rights for Rome's Italian allies and grain subsidies for the impoverished. His popularity among common Romans skyrocketed, but conservative senators once again viewed him as a danger. Gaius was killed in January after he and his followers were brutally repressed. As early political reform martyrs, the Gracchi brothers came to represent social justice. A change in Roman politics was indicated by their brutal murders. Rome's stability was threatened by the growing use of violence as a political instrument. Rome would soon encounter much more serious problems. Strong generals rose to prominence in the late Republic, thanks to their devoted troops and military prowess. The ambitious and intelligent Gaius Marius rebuilt the Roman army in January by enlisting and equipping impoverished civilians at public cost. His soldiers developed an intense personal loyalty to him, rather than just to Rome, setting a risky precedent that would permanently alter Roman politics. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, Marius's adversary, appeared shortly after. Between 1988 and 82 BC, tensions between the two generals intensified into a catastrophic civil war. Sulla eventually overthrew Marius's followers and established himself as the dictator of Rome. He reshaped the government to benefit the affluent elite and governed with brutality, putting opponents to death. Sulla's dictatorship demonstrated that ultimate power might be acquired by force, undermining the Republic's established checks and balances, even if he willingly withdrew soon after. Another crisis, the Spartacus insurrection in 73 BC, erupted as political unrest intensified. Former slave and gladiator Spartacus spearheaded a large-scale rebellion against Roman tyranny. Rome's troops faced up against Spartacus's army of runaway slaves and destitute Romans for 2 years. The uprising, which was ultimately put down by Marcus Licinius Crassus in 71 BC, revealed severe inequalities and suffering in Roman society. Rome was profoundly changed by these tumultuous decades. The power of the Senate declined, internal strife grew more intense, and aspirational leaders such as Marcus Crassus, Pompey the Great, and Julius Caesar rose to prominence. Each pursued power through political connections, military might, and public favor, indicating the Republic's slow decline into monarchy. Rome was at a turning point by the middle of the 1st century BC. Its civilization had been transformed by centuries of growth, wealth, and internal strife. The Republic, which was established on the tenets of balance and shared government, now faced an uncertain future. Ambition, riches, and a changing globe have put its historic traditions to the test. Julius Caesar, a man who would significantly influence Rome's future, rose to prominence during the tumultuous latter decades of the Roman Republic. Caesar ascended quickly, thanks to his ambition, intelligence, and political acumen. He was born in January into an aristocratic but not very affluent family. Caesar demonstrated his abilities as a young man as a great orator and military leader. He managed Rome's complicated political environment by establishing smart relationships. In 60 BC, he formed the first triumvirate, his most well-known political alliance with two influential people, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the richest citizen of Rome, and Pompey the Great, the city's most renowned commander. Caesar's quick ascent was made possible by this unofficial partnership, which also gave him leadership of the military and important governmental positions. Caesar assumed leadership of Roman armies in Gaul, present-day France, Belgium, and portions of Switzerland in 588 BC. Caesar led a brutal and ambitious war known as the Gallic Wars over the course of the following 8 years. Caesar's riches, popularity, and military might all skyrocketed as a result of these wars, which also greatly enlarged Rome's dominion. The senators of Rome were concerned about Caesar's success because they saw his rising popularity and authority as a direct threat. Knowing that Caesar would become politically vulnerable, his former comrade, Pompey, who is now allied with the conservative Senate, ordered Caesar to disperse his army and return to Rome, threatening the delicate balance of the Republic. When faced with a crucial choice, Caesar famously defied the Senate's orders and crossed the Rubicon River in 49% BC, igniting a civil war in Rome. His words, "The die is cast," immortalized his audacious conduct. Rome was split by the war, which pitted Pompey and the Senate's armies against Caesar's devoted legions in a bloody quest for dominance. Pompey and the senators were forced to leave Italy as Caesar swiftly moved on Rome. Caesar's army beat Pompey's soldiers in the pivotal battle of Pharsalus in Greece in 488 BC. In an attempt to gain Caesar's favor, Pompey escaped to Egypt, where he was assassinated, a move that infuriated Caesar, who thought it was dishonorable. After defeating Pompey, Caesar quickly established his dominance and rose to become Rome's undisputed leader. He strengthened Rome's administration and society by implementing a number of changes. Caesar reorganized the Roman calendar, created the Julian calendar system that still influences ours today, redistributed territory, built colonies for the impoverished, and enhanced infrastructure. However, many senators were concerned that Rome was reverting to monarchy, and Caesar's quick ascent to total authority terrified them. Rome's political elite became more resentful of Caesar, despite his reforms and popularity with the populace. A group of senators, led by Brutus and Cassius, killed Caesar on March, which will always be known as the Ides of March. They thought his passing would bring back the Republic's customary liberties and system of government, but Caesar's assassination led to another civil war. When Caesar's devoted supporters and heirs sought retribution against his killers, Rome descended into anarchy once more. Caesar's assassination demonstrated that Rome could no longer operate efficiently under its conventional republican framework, hastening the fall of the Republic rather than saving it. Two notable individuals sprang from this chaos: Octavian, Caesar's great-nephew, and adoptive successor, and Mark Antony, his trusty commander. Their first coalition quickly fell apart, paving the way for a decisive conflict. As the ancient principles of common government vanished from memory and power consolidated in fewer hands, Rome's republic was on the precipice. Rome's transition from a republic to an empire which would permanently alter history was put in motion. Following the killing of Julius Caesar, Rome saw internal strife once more. A power vacuum resulted in violent clashes between Caesar's killers and supporters, which sparked a new civil war in the Republic. A young, shrewd leader called Octavian, Caesar's successor, sprang from this turmoil. When Caesar died in 44 BC, Octavian, his adopted son and grandnephew, was just 19 years old. Despite his youth, he showed extraordinary drive and political aptitude very soon. Octavian wanted retribution against Caesar's killers, particularly Brutus and Cassius, by briefly siding with Mark Antony, Caesar's faithful lieutenant. At the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, Antony and Octavian united to decisively beat their adversaries, establishing their supremacy over Rome. The second triumvirate was created after this triumph by Antony, Octavian, and Marcus Lepidus, a third ally. This new coalition, which officially divided Rome's provinces among the three leaders, was legally empowered in contrast to the informal partnership Caesar had previously formed. Octavian seized power in the regions to the west. Lepidus dominated North Africa, while Antony ruled the eastern regions, which included Egypt. But this partnership soon fell apart, forcing Lepidus to retire and making Antony and Octavian competitors. Famously, Antony started establishing his power base in the east by allying himself both politically and romantically with Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. In contrast, Octavian effectively swayed Roman public opinion against Antony by portraying his intimate relationship with Cleopatra as a violation of Roman customs and interests. The naval battle of Actium, which took place close to Greece in 31 BC, marked the end of the contest. Marcus Agrippa, Octavian's outstanding general, led his army to a decisive victory against Antony and Cleopatra. Instead of giving up, after losing Antony, and Cleopatra committed suicide, making Octavian the uncontested ruler of Rome. In 27 BC, Octavian, the most powerful person in the Roman world, returned to Rome. He deftly avoided connotations with monarchy, which the Romans had deeply mistrusted since the overthrow of their last king centuries before, by posing as Rome's lowly servant, rather than publicly announcing his coronation. In exchange for officially restoring the Roman Senate's authority, he was given the honorific title Augustus, which means adored one. Despite his seeming modesty, Augustus carefully maintained final say. Under the guise of conventional republican rule, he rose to become Rome's first emperor. In order to stabilize Rome's economy, military, and society, Augustus implemented important reforms and expertly restructured the city's government. He restructured taxation, constructed a massive road network, maintained a professional standing army, and enhanced the administration of Rome's numerous provinces. Along with starting large-scale building projects, Augustus is renowned for saying that he turned Rome from a city of bricks to one of marble. Great buildings, like as theaters, temples, and public areas that represented Rome's magnificence, arose under his direction. The Pax Romana, or Roman peace, was an era of peace and stability that lasted for more than 2 centuries and was brought about by Augustus's rule. Cities grew, trade thrived, and Roman culture permeated every part of the empire. During this extraordinary time, citizens experienced relative wealth, stability, and security. However, the reign of Augustus radically changed Roman administration. Centralized imperial authority supplanted the republic's principles of shared power and democratic engagement. Augustus had successfully established a kingdom under a new name, despite his meticulous portrayal as Rome's lowly servant. Rome was at its height of richest power and influence when Augustus died in the year 14 AD. By carefully establishing a long-lasting imperial structure, he prepared the way for succeeding emperors to dominate Rome for generations to come. A massive empire whose influence would reverberate throughout history had replaced the Republic, which had ended peacefully but irrevocably. The Roman Empire had to deal with its first imperial succession after Augustus's death in AD 14. In an effort to maintain continuity and stability, Augustus had wisely selected Tiberius, his stepson, as his heir. The Julio-Claudian dynasty, Rome's first imperial family, began at this time and controlled the empire from 14 AD to 68 AD. It was a time of cultural development, political intrigue, and the difficulties of establishing imperial authority. Tiberius was a competent yet hesitant ruler. Despite his administrative prowess and military might, he lacked Augustus's charm and political savvy. He kept Rome stable and prosperous throughout his rule, but he also grew more reclusive and distrustful. Tiberius spent a major portion of his final years alone on the island of Capri. After fleeing Rome, leaving Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the ambitious and cunning prefect, in charge of administration. Sejanus used Tiberius's absence to crush opponents, creating a climate of distrust and terror that lasted until the emperor put him to death for plotting. Caligula, Tiberius's great-nephew, succeeded him when he passed away in AD 307. Romans eager for a new beginning greeted Caligula with open arms at first, but he quickly proved to be violent, unstable, and unpredictable. Cruelty, excess, and scandal quickly characterized his reign. There were rumors about his extravagant spending, his capricious orders, and his assertions of celestial rank. After just 4 turbulent years as Emperor, Caligula was slain by his own guard in AD 41, bringing an abrupt end to his rule. Rome's Praetorian Guard declared his uncle Claudius emperor after Caligula was killed. Many people first thought Claudius was weak or incompetent because of his physical limitations, but he shocked Rome with his skilled and astute leadership. He greatly increased the empire's size, most notably by capturing Britain in AD 43, a triumph that was enthusiastically praised. Claudius also constructed vast infrastructure, like as ports and aqueducts, improved judicial justice, and fortified Rome's bureaucracy. However, controversy and intrigue plagued Claudius's private life. He had a catastrophic marriage to his niece, Agrippina the Younger. Agrippina was driven cunning and committed to securing authority for her son Nero from a prior union. The general consensus among ancient historians was that Agrippina planned Claudius's poisoned death in AD 54 in order to make room for Nero's ascension. At the age of 16, Nero ascended to the throne with the guidance of sage counselors such as the general Burrus and the philosopher Seneca. but his rule quickly descended into extravagance, despotism, and notoriety. Nero became less and less involved in the duties of governance as he embraced opulent artistic endeavors and grandiose public displays. He persecuted Christians, whom he accused of starting the massive fire that destroyed Rome in AD 64. According to some historical texts, Nero started the fire to make room for his lavish new palace complex, the Domus Aurea. Nero's actions became increasingly unpredictable as his rule dragged on. He put to death several people he believed to be his competitors, including his wife Agrippina, his mother, and a number of well-known senators. Widespread discontent with Nero's mismanagement eventually led to uprisings throughout the empire in AD 608. The Julio-Claudian dynasty came to an end when Nero, abandoned by his allies, left Rome and committed himself because he was about to be captured. The legacy of the Julio-Claudian emperors is complicated. Their reigns were characterized by brutality, instability, and abuses of power. But they also created magnificent infrastructure, extended Rome's frontiers, and improved its culture. Rome saw a period of civil conflict, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, after Nero's disastrous demise, which put the empire that Augustus had so carefully established decades earlier to the test. Rome entered a brief but bloody era, known as the Year of the Four Emperors, following Nero's tumultuous death in AD 608. Galba, Otho Vitellius, and Vespasian all made quick claims to the imperial throne. As competing generals and their armies fought for control, Rome was ripped apart by civil war, instability, and uncertainty, putting the empire's fundamental foundations to the test. Finally, when Vespasian, a well-liked commander leading Rome's army in Judea, triumphed, peace restored. He ascended to the throne in AD 609 and established the Flavian dynasty, a line that would bring stability and wealth back after years of unrest. In contrast to his opulent forebears, Vespasian turned out to be a sensible and orderly monarch. Restoring Rome's economy and popular morale was his first priority. He restored Rome's finances by cautious spending and additional levies, among other measures. Vespasian's famous statement that money does not stink, in reference to his charge on public restrooms, highlights his practical strategy for reviving Rome's economy. Under his leadership, Rome started large-scale construction projects intended to boost the economy and show off the empire's resurgent might. The Flavian Amphitheater, which became the Colosseum, was the most well-known of them. This splendid stadium became Rome's most recognizable landmark, and it was financed in large part by valuables stolen from Jerusalem after the Jewish insurrection was put down in AD 70. The Colosseum, which could accommodate over 50,000 people, was the site of public shows, gladiatorial fights, and reenactments of well-known conflicts that demonstrated Rome's might and culture to its populace. Vespasian left the empire affluent and stable when he passed away in the year 709. He was followed by his son, Titus, who is regarded as one of the most kind and adored emperors in Rome. Despite having a brief 2-year reign, Titus experienced 2 notable catastrophes. The cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum were preserved in vivid detail for future generations to uncover when Mount Vesuvius erupted in AD 79, burying them beneath volcanic ash and lava. Rome suffered significant damage from a devastating fire the following year. In spite of these catastrophes, Titus reacted quickly and charitably, offering relief and rebuilding, which further won over the Roman populace. In AD 81, Titus's brother Domitian succeeded him as emperor following his untimely death. Domitian was more skeptical and authoritarian than his father and brother. At first, stability and massive construction projects, including palaces, temples, and public works, were brought about under his administration. However, Domitian became more and more suspicious over time, mainly depending on informants and secret police who carried out brutal purges of alleged conspirators. Domitian fortified Rome's boundaries and increased the effectiveness of the empire's governance in spite of these sinister inclinations. He personally oversaw military operations that strengthened Rome's borders by extending Roman dominion into Germania and Britain. The elite in Rome eventually became deeply resentful of Domitian's autocratic reign. His assassination by conspirators in AD 96 marked the sudden end of the Flavian monarchy. Ordinary Romans, in contrast to senators, viewed Domitian as a ruler who provided infrastructure stability and better living circumstances to a large portion of the empire. Rome found itself at yet another fork in the road with the fall of the Flavian dynasty. The next era, referred to as the Age of the Five Excellent Emperors, would be the height of Roman dominance, wealth, and power. Rome's incredible ability to reinvent itself, even in the face of extreme suffering, was demonstrated by the solid foundation that the Flavians' recovery had established, which allowed the empire to enter a new golden era of peace culture and stability. The Roman Empire underwent an unparalleled period of stability, prosperity, and enlightened government when Domitian was assassinated in AD 96. This period is now regarded as the age of the five excellent emperors. The Roman Empire reached its zenith under the leadership of Nerva Trajan, Hadrian Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, who all held office in succession from AD 96 to January 1980. The first of these emperors, Nerva, was a well-respected senator who was picked for the job because he was sensible, moderate, and unlikely to make the same mistakes Domitian had made with his dictatorial rule. Nerva established a significant precedent by choosing a competent successor, Trajan, solely on the basis of competence rather than familial ties, despite her advanced age and short rule AD 96 and 98. Known as one of Rome's greatest emperors, Trajan reigned from AD 98 to January 2017. Trajan, the first emperor from the provinces and a native of Spain, represented Rome's growing inclusiveness. In addition, he was an exceptional military leader who brought the empire to its fullest height by capturing additional lands in Dacia, present-day Romania, and portions of Mesopotamia. The money gained from these conquests was used to finance large-scale public works projects such as Trajan's Column, a colossal column that commemorates his military triumphs, and Trajan's Forum, a huge public space. Trajan was equally respected for his humility and fairness as he was for his military prowess. In order to ensure more social stability and prosperity, he extended public welfare programs and introduced grain subsidies to boost the welfare of Rome's poorest people. Hadrian, who lived from AD 117 to AD 1938, inherited a huge, expansive empire after Trajan. Hadrian concentrated less on growth and more on consolidation, since he understood how difficult it would be to retain such vast territory. He is renowned for having personally inspected towns, administrative structures, and defenses while traveling far around the empire. Hadrian's Wall, a strong defense wall that delineated the northern edge of the empire, is his most famous legacy. Significant construction projects were also commissioned by Hadrian, such as the majestic Pantheon in Rome, whose towering dome is still a tribute to the brilliance of Roman architecture. Rome's artistic and cultural life flourished under Hadrian's rule. He promoted Greek philosophy, literature, and the arts, giving Roman culture a more global perspective. Antoninus Pius Hadrian's chosen successor governed softly and successfully from AD 138 to January 1961. His rule was marked by unusual stability and tranquility. Because he valued diplomacy and negotiation above combat, Antoninus never personally led forces into battle. Rome was left economically safe and affluent as a result of his prudent financial management, maintenance of public welfare programs, and infrastructural improvements. The last emperor of this golden period, Marcus Aurelius, who reigned from AD 11611 to January 1980, is known as the Philosopher Emperor. Marcus Aurelius, who was greatly influenced by Stoicism, wrote Meditations, a profound meditation on morality, responsibility, and human nature that is still relevant today. Marcus, however, spent a large portion of his time physically defending the empire because of the rising challenges from outside invaders throughout his reign, especially along the northern boundary with Germanic tribes. The peaceful succession system put in place by his predecessors came to an end when Marcus Aurelius named his son Commodus as his successor, despite his leadership and wisdom. Rome fell into chaos once more during Commodus's terrible administration. However, there is a significant and enduring legacy from the time of the 5 virtuous emperors. It was a time of unequaled cultural blossoming affluence and enlightened government in Roman history. Under the direction of intelligent leaders committed to justice, peace, and responsible administration, their leadership demonstrated Rome's extraordinary potential. Romans would frequently reflect on this heyday with fondness and longing as the empire moved into its next, more difficult phase, although it was never a high point, completely matched once more. The Roman Empire gradually entered a period of protracted turmoil and instability with the death of Marcus Aurelius in AD 188. Commodus, his son and heir, soon shone his unsuitability for leadership by causing instability in Rome with his reckless actions and lavish harshness. Commodus viewed himself as a godlike character who was fixated on gladiatorial battle and personal glory, in contrast to his wise and modest father. Disregarding his responsibilities, he often engaged in fictitious combat at the Colosseum, shocking the Roman nobility. Rome's finances were depleted by his extravagant spending, and his unpredictable violent outbursts instilled suspicion and terror. Ultimately, the dynasty Nerva established came to a sudden and brutal end when conspirators killed Commodus in AD 192. Similar to the previous year of the 4 emperors, Commodus's death set off yet another tumultuous power struggle. The Severan dynasty, which began with Septimius Severus in AD 113, sprang from this chaos. Severus was a powerful military leader who brought about a brief return to order, but he also greatly transferred authority in favor of the army. Military control was established during his reign, setting a risky precedent that would follow Rome for years to come. Rome's collapse was carried on by Severus's sons Caracalla and Gaeta, Caracalla's image as a vicious and unstable man was cemented when he killed his brother Gaeta in front of their mother. Caracalla did, however, make one important and enduring contribution. He issued the Antonine Constitution, Constitutio Antoniniana, in AD 212, which gave almost all of the free people of the empire Roman citizenship. This decree significantly changed Rome's identity and made citizenship broadly available, even though its main purpose was to raise money. Rome descended into nearly 50 years of anarchy following the killing of Caracalla in AD 217, which is now known as the crisis of the 3rd century. In addition to internal uprisings, the empire was always under attack from Persians in the East Germanic tribes in the north and external foes. Widespread poverty and social discontent resulted from the breakdown of trade channels, rising inflation, and worsening economic instability. The ongoing political unrest was the most concerning. Over the course of 50 years, Rome had more than 20 emperors, many of whom came to power through civil war or assassination. Rome's institutions were undermined by this quick transition, which also left the populace uneasy and afraid for the future. The empire itself seemed on the verge of disintegration. Provinces divided into transient autonomous entities, making it nearly difficult to efficiently rule Rome's enormous area. An already dire position was made worse by financial crises, famines, and plagues that further debilitated civilization. Nevertheless, some monarchs made an effort at change throughout this protracted unrest. Known as the world's restorer, Emperor Aurelian, who reigned from AD 270 to February, reclaimed lost lands and brought the empire back together. Temporary calm was brought about by his quick and decisive military efforts, but Rome quickly returned to chaos after his murder. This period of instability was ultimately terminated by Emperor Diocletian, who ascended in AD 214. Diocletian drastically reorganized the military and management of the empire by establishing the Tetrarchy, which divided Rome's enormous territory into smaller, more manageable regions governed by co-emperors. Decades of anarchy came to an end when he consolidated power, fortified borders, and stabilized the currency. Roman government was drastically altered by Diocletian's reforms, which irrevocably shifted the empire toward more authoritarian rule and centralization. Rome had been put to the ultimate test during the turbulent 3rd century, and the empire was irrevocably altered. Rome, however, persevered, exhibiting extraordinary adaptation and tenacity, and is now ready to embark on its last historical chapter, a time of significant change and ultimate shift to a new global order. Thanks to Diocletian's reforms, the Roman Empire had partially stabilized by the beginning of the 4th century. However, significant alterations were about to permanently alter Rome's political, ecclesiastical, and cultural landscape. One of Rome's most powerful rulers, Constantine the Great, was at the center of this change. After his father, Constantius, died in AD 306, Constantine succeeded him as emperor. But shortly after, he was embroiled in a bitter fight for dominance with other generals and emperors. The pivotal moment occurred in AD 312 during the well-known Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which took place just outside of Rome. Before this fight, Constantine reportedly had a deep vision in which he saw a cross of light in the sky with the words "Conquer" written alongside it. Constantine ordered his men to paint the Christian emblem, the Chi-Rho, on their shields because he thought this was a supernatural message. With a resounding victory, Constantine credited the Christian god with his success. Shortly after, in AD 3131, he issued the Edict of Milan, which officially allowed Christianity to flourish across the empire. This was a huge choice. Roman rulers had persecuted and distrusted Christians for generations. Rome's spiritual character was irreversibly altered when Constantine's backing turned Christianity from an underground movement into an officially acknowledged religion. Throughout his rule, Constantine persisted in advancing Christianity by providing funds for the construction of churches, including Rome's Peter's Basilica, the first saint, and many more around the empire. Additionally, in AD 325, he called the Council of Nicaea, a historic assembly of Christian bishops that unified and shaped the future of Christianity by establishing important beliefs and customs. However, Constantine's changes went beyond his religious beliefs. He made a crucial political choice by establishing a new imperial capital. Despite its historical importance, Rome was no longer as strategically important to the empire's expanding eastern lands. Byzantium was renamed Constantinople, the city of Constantine, after Constantine formally dedicated it in AD 330. This city, which is now Istanbul, was strategically important for administration, trade, and defense because of its advantageous location at the intersection of Europe and Asia. Constantinople swiftly rose to prominence as an imperial metropolis, complete with churches' walls, expansive public squares, and magnificent palaces. It was created by Constantine to compete with Rome and is a glaring example of the empire's changing power dynamics. Politically, commercially, and culturally, the eastern provinces gained prominence after this. Constantine's rule was not without controversy, despite his major accomplishments and reforms. By consolidating authority and undermining established republican institutions, he was able to keep total control over the empire. In contrast to the ancient Roman republican traditions, Constantine's authoritarian manner established the foundation for a new kind of imperial rule characterized by divine power. When Constantine passed away in 337 AD, his realm had undergone significant change. He had created a new city that would serve as the seat of imperial authority for more than 1,000 years, put an end to decades of Christian persecution, and made Christianity the preferred religion of Rome. However, his legacy was nuanced. The significance of Constantinople progressively overshadowed that of Rome. The empire continued to be shaped by Constantine's sons and successors throughout the ensuing decades, solidifying Christianity's supremacy and consolidating imperial power even further. Constantine placed Rome on a new track by converting to Christianity and moving the empire's center of power eastward. This path would carry Rome's legacy into the medieval era and have a significant impact on the development of Western culture for centuries to come. The Roman Empire had undergone significant change by the end of the 4th century. Christianity became the predominant religion in Rome during Constantine's reign, and authority moved eastward to Constantinople. However, these adjustments also resulted in fresh difficulties, conflicts, and divides, laying the groundwork for the empire's ultimate disintegration. Following Constantine's death in 337 AD, The empire was beset by internal strife among his sons, who governed via rivalries and bloodshed and unequally distributed authority. By controlling various regions of the enormous Roman Empire, Constantine II, Constantius II, and Constans weakened centralized authority and left Rome open to both internal and external threats. Religious conflicts were more intense, further aggravating the situation. There were intense internal conflicts over theological concepts in Christianity, which is now the official religion of Rome. In an effort to impose uniformity, emperors regularly got involved in these theological disputes, which frequently led to bloodshed, persecution, and social instability. The Battle of Adrianople, which took place in AD 378 during this unrest, was a crucial occasion. A sizable band of Gothic soldiers who had previously fled to Roman territory to avoid Hun invasions confronted Emperor Valens. These Gothic exiles revolted because they had been mistreated by Rome. Emperor Valens was killed when the Goths soundly beat Rome's forces at Adrianople. Rome's military weakness and the brittleness of her boundary fortifications were made clear by this disaster. Emperor Theodosius I, who ascended to power in 379 AD, made an effort to consolidate the empire in response. By incorporating Gothic troops into the Roman army, he was able to maintain a brief state of calm, although this would eventually cause serious internal problems. More significantly, Theodosius made a choice that had far-reaching effects in AD 395, shortly before he passed away. His division of the Roman Empire into the Eastern Roman Empire, based in Constantinople, and the Western Roman Empire, centered in Rome, was permanent. This separation, which was first created for administrative efficiency, ended up becoming permanent and reflected the profound cultural and political divide between the Greek-speaking East and the Latin-speaking West. Because of its more prosperous towns, thriving trade, and superior defensive locations, the eastern half, later known as the Byzantine Empire, would continue to be powerful for centuries. However, the western half suffered from escalating economic hardship, waning military might, and frequent invasions. Rome's established power structures quickly deteriorated in the west. Large numbers of barbarian tribes, Visigoths, Vandals, Franks, Saxons, and others started to invade Roman territory. These clans settled quietly at first, but soon declared their independence, further dividing Rome's western lands. When the Visigothic ruler Alaric seized and pillaged the Eternal City in AD 410, Rome itself faced an unparalleled crisis. This symbolic collapse surprised Romans worldwide, indicating the empire's demise was genuine and irrevocable, even if it was not as destructive as previous invasions. Rome's power in the West had drastically diminished by the middle of the 5th century. Once strictly administered, vast areas were turned into semi-independent kingdoms with barbarian chieftains in charge. Emperors came and went quickly and rarely ruled successfully, and the Roman army had deteriorated considerably. Due to the disruption of trade routes and the decline of cities, the Western economy was also severely damaged. The ultimate blow occurred in AD 476, when Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor, was overthrown by a Germanic leader named Odoacer. Historians later used this date to denote the end of the old Roman world, and it also marked the conventional end of the Western Roman Empire. Nevertheless, the Eastern Roman Empire remained prosperous and powerful, maintaining Roman customs for almost a millennium. Known as the Byzantine Empire, it preserved culture, Christianity, Roman law, and old knowledge long into the Middle Ages. As a result, while Rome's Eastern heritage persisted, connecting the ancient and medieval worlds, its final century was characterized by significant change, split, and collapse in the West. But the narrative of Rome was far from over. For generations to follow, its impact persisted in influencing law, religion, history, and society. Europe saw a significant transformation with the formal fall of the Western Roman Empire in AD 476. Under Roman administration, the once unified region broke up into several separate kingdoms, each headed by a different Germanic tribe, known as the barbarians. Eventually, these kingdoms would serve as the cornerstones of medieval Europe, drastically altering the continent's political, cultural, and social environment. The Germanic leader, Odoacer, who, having overthrown the final Roman emperor, became the first Italian monarch. Odoacer blended Germanic traditions with Roman laws and practices, retaining many aspects of Roman administration rather than abandoning them. Working closely with the Roman Senate, he maintained Roman institutions and culture in Italy for several more decades, while ruling with a rather moderate approach. However, in AD 489, Theodoric, the king of the Ostrogoths, a Germanic group who had migrated inside the empire's borders, invaded Italy, bringing an end to Odoacer's reign. Odoacer was ultimately vanquished by Theodoric, who founded the Ostrogothic kingdom. Italy briefly returned to stability, wealth, and cultural splendor under Theodoric. By upholding Roman laws, customs, and administrative frameworks, he successfully combined Gothic and Roman cultures, fostering an atmosphere that supported the growth of literature, the arts, and education. Similar kingdoms emerged in other parts of Europe. Under the leadership of Clovis, who established the Merovingian dynasty in AD 481, the Franks became the dominant force in Gaul. Clovis is famous for connecting his realm closely with the Roman Church after adopting to Christianity in AD 496. His conversion was a turning point in European history that established a solid partnership between Christianity and the Frankish monarchy that would influence Europe for decades to come. The Visigoths created a monarchy in Spain that was based on the Iberian Peninsula, while preserving a careful balancing act between Gothic and Roman customs. They also became Christians, which helped Christianity take over and proliferate throughout Europe. Around the year 400 AD, Rome withdrew from Britain, leaving the island open to attack. Along Britain's eastern coast, tribes like the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes started to settle. Over time, they established kingdoms that eventually gave rise to early Anglo-Saxon England. Britain experienced a period of instability and cultural transformation as a result of the widespread collapse of Roman cities, infrastructure, and governmental institutions. Many tribes, like the Vandals, Lombards, and Burgundians, established new lands farther east in places like Germany and Eastern Europe. Under the leadership of Genseric, the Vandals famously founded a kingdom in North Africa in AD 429. They also conducted invasions on Rome itself, from here infamously capturing the city in AD 455. Many Roman institutions, laws, and customs persisted in these new kingdoms, despite the political division brought about by the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. The Romantic languages of today, Italian, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Romanian slowly replaced Latin as the language of education, church, and government. With the help of the new barbarian rulers, the Christian church gained power and continued to shape the medieval world while conserving Roman religious customs. However, these changes also signaled the end of classical antiquity in the West. Historians have referred to this time of uncertainty and change, following the fall of the Roman Empire, as the early Middle Ages, or more controversially, the Dark Ages. Ancient unity came to an end with the collapse of Rome, but it also created the foundation for the great variety of medieval European culture. Rome's political demise therefore served as the impetus for a fresh start, putting Europe on a course toward feudalism, medieval kingdoms, and a drastically changed global order, a legacy that is still felt strongly today. The Eastern Roman Empire, which was based on Constantinople, not only survived, but thrived, while the Western Roman Empire broke up and collapsed. As a dynamic link between the ancient and medieval worlds, the Byzantine Empire, as it is now known, maintained and expanded Roman culture throughout the Middle Ages. With its advantageous location at the meeting point of Europe and Asia, Constantinople quickly became a powerful and affluent city. Known for its massive defenses, splendid palaces, busy marketplaces, and imposing cathedrals. It was founded by Constantine the Great in AD 330 and swiftly rose to become the greatest and wealthiest city in Europe. Because of its location, the empire was able to dominate profitable trade routes between the East and the West, which brought with it a plethora of cultural variety. During the reign of Justinian, the Fire, who reigned from AD 527 to Ero 5 1965, the Byzantine Empire achieved a spectacular zenith in the 6th century. Under the leadership of his intelligent and powerful wife, Theodora Justinian, worked to bring the previous Roman Empire's splendor and geographical integrity back. During his reign, Byzantine soldiers retook large areas that had been lost to the barbarians, including as portions of Spain, Italy, and North Africa. Much of the Mediterranean region was briefly brought back under Byzantine control, thanks to the remarkable military achievements of his well-known commander, Belisarius. Justinian's most lasting impact was the significant legal changes that were implemented during his reign. He ordered the Justinian Code, also known as the Corpus Juris Civilis, a thorough compilation and modification of Roman law. By upholding Roman legal concepts, this code influenced law for generations to come and laid the groundwork for contemporary legal systems throughout Europe. Justinian's ambitious plans were further illustrated by his extensive building projects around Constantinople. The Hagia Sophia, or Church of the Holy Wisdom, which was finished in AD 537, is his most notable accomplishment. Known for its massive dome and magnificent interior embellishments made of marble gold mosaics and complex sculptures, this architectural wonder represented Byzantium, artistic success, cultural refinement, and wealth. A monument of Byzantine ingenuity and religious fervor, the Hagia Sophia stood as the world's biggest church for over a millennium. By conserving innumerable books, ideologies, and scientific disciplines that may have been lost otherwise, the Byzantine Empire took on the role of cultural steward of ancient Greek and Roman knowledge. By carefully replicating old manuscripts, Byzantine academics made sure that a large portion of classical knowledge persisted into succeeding ages, eventually making its way to Western Europe and making a substantial contribution to the Renaissance. Justinian's ambitious rule, however, also put a burden on the empire's finances. Following his passing, fresh external threats surfaced and reclaimed territory in the west slowly fell away once more. Slavic tribes in the North, Persians in the east, and eventually the quick spread of Islam from the Arabian Peninsula in the 7th century all put strain on the empire. Egypt, Syria, and Palestine were among the major lands that the Byzantine Empire had lost to the Islamic caliphates by the end of the 7th century. But Constantinople itself persevered, retaining its status as a strong cultural and political hub thanks to its strong walls and tenacious fortifications. The Byzantine Empire evolved and endured, despite losing territory, becoming into a more stable but smaller empire over the Middle Ages. Through missionary activity that converted the Slavic peoples to Christianity, it continued to be a shining example of Greek culture. Orthodox Christianity and Roman legal system greatly impacting nearby countries and forming Eastern Europe. As a result, Byzantium protected old customs, literature, art, and culture, perpetuating Rome's heritage even after the fall of the Western Empire. By bridging the gap between the ancient Roman past and the medieval European future, its colorful history brought stability and continuity at a time of upheaval, leaving a lasting legacy that continues to have an influence today. Rome's heritage continued to influence new kingdoms and rulers in Western Europe far from Constantinople. The Frankish kingdom, which included present-day France and Germany, was the most potent force in Europe by the 9th century. Significant turning point in European history was the astonishing resurgence of Roman customs and culture in Western Europe under the reign of Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great. In AD 768, Charlemagne succeeded his father, Pepin the Short, as king of the Franks, taking over a strong but disjointed realm. A visionary leader, Charlemagne was committed to bringing Western Europe's dispersed regions together and re-establishing administration, education, and stability. He established the biggest empire in Western Europe since the fall of Rome by extending his kingdom across a substantial portion of present-day France, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and beyond by unrelenting military operations, diplomacy, and efficient administration. In AD 800, Charlemagne accomplished one of his greatest triumphs. Pope Leo III crowned him Emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day in Rome, resurrecting the title that had lain dormant for centuries since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. This occasion laid the groundwork for what historians have since referred to as the Holy Roman Empire, by symbolically re-establishing Western Europe's connection to its Roman history. Additionally, it signaled a major alliance between the Roman Catholic Church and the Frankish royalty, one that would have a profound impact on medieval European politics and culture. Often referred to as the Carolingian realm, Charlemagne's realm was a thriving hub of the Carolingian Renaissance, a period of intellectual and cultural renewal. Charlemagne aggressively promoted learning across his empire because he had a strong belief in scholarship, art, and education. He brought academics from all across Europe to his court in Aachen by establishing schools and promoting the study of Latin philosophy, science, and religion. Under his sponsorship, old Roman manuscripts were carefully copied and preserved by scribes and monks, guaranteeing the survival of classical knowledge, law, and literature for generations to come. Latin had a resurgence as a language of academia governance and religion, strengthening ties between medieval Europe and its Roman heritage. Governance was also revived by Charlemagne's empire by separating his lands into counties run by obedient officials called as counts. He instituted effective administrative reforms. He often dispatched royal inspectors known as missi dominici to supervise local government and guarantee that the law and justice were administered equitably and consistently in order to guarantee good administration. A level of stability and prosperity that Europe had not experienced since the Roman era was brought forth by this meticulous administrative organization. Nevertheless, Charlemagne's dominion had problems in spite of his achievements. It was challenging to manage his enormous lands after his death in AD 814 because his successors lacked his leadership and vision. The empire quickly broke apart into independent kingdoms, opening the door for the creation of independent European states. Nevertheless, Charlemagne left behind a lasting legacy. He influenced medieval Europe by bringing back Roman customs, advancing culture and education, and re-establishing powerful central government. Despite its frequent disintegration, the Holy Roman Empire he established remained an enduring representation of Europe's Roman past in a variety of forms until the 19th century. By reviving Roman principles of law, education, and administration, and putting Europe on a new path that would shape its future for generations, Charlemagne thus became a critical bridge connecting the ancient Roman past with medieval Europe. Through Charlemagne's efforts, Rome persisted in reverberating across history, permanently influencing Europe's political and cultural character. The idea of Rome persisted after Charlemagne's rule, deeply ingrained in the framework of medieval European society. The ancient empire had long since fallen, yet its influence endured. Europe's changing identity was significantly shaped by its laws, language, religion, culture, and administration. One of Rome's most enduring legacies was the Roman Catholic Church, which rose to prominence as the main religious and cultural organization in medieval Europe. Latin continued to be the language of study, religion, and diplomacy, giving Europe a shared intellectual history. Classical knowledge endured the chaotic medieval era because to the preservation of old Roman and Greek literature in monasteries and cathedrals, which were carefully copied by monks and academics. The construction and organization of the church itself were modeled after Roman customs. The Pope, who was headquartered in Rome, had great spiritual power and influenced Europeans' attitudes, values, and customs. Roman conventions served as the model for church construction art and ceremonies, which combined Christian symbolism with classical elements. Magnificent cathedrals and monasteries built throughout medieval Europe were influenced by Roman architectural innovations, including arches, domes, and basilicas. Roman law had a long-lasting effect as well. The Byzantine Empire produced Justinian's Code, which served as the basis for European legal customs. This ancient Roman legal system saw a resurgence in the 12th and 13th centuries, and it was widely studied at the first colleges in Europe. It served as the foundation for current legal ideas that are still essential to legal systems across the world today, including as justice, property rights, citizenship, and the rule of law. Roman ideals were even reflected in medieval rule. Despite being dispersed and disorganized, Charlemagne's Holy Roman Empire symbolically upheld Roman principles of centralized power. imperial legitimacy and civic responsibility. Invoking Roman images and titles, kings and emperors across medieval Europe positioned themselves as the heirs of Rome's heritage, asserting that they ruled by divine right and historical lineage. In terms of culture, medieval Europe was heavily influenced by Rome. Over time, Latin gave rise to the Romance languages that are now spoken by millions of people: French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian. Rhetoric, philosophy, and Roman literature all became vital parts of medieval education. By copying the style, subjects, and concepts of Roman classics like Virgil, Cicero, Ovid, and Seneca, authors and poets were able to bridge the gap between ancient and medieval philosophy. However, Rome left behind more than only its legacy in terms of administration, language, law, and religion. Roman roads, bridges, aqueducts, and public structures persisted for centuries and had an impact on medieval cities and towns. Long into the Middle Ages, several Roman roads were still in use, linking far-flung areas and promoting communication, trade, and pilgrimage. Fresh water was still supplied by Roman aqueducts, and medieval architects and builders were influenced by Roman technical methods. Up until 1453, the Byzantine Empire in the East carried on the direct heritage of Rome, perpetuating Greek and Roman knowledge, customs, and imperial governance for a very long time. Western Europe was in disarray. Byzantium had a major role in the European Renaissance, a renaissance of classical culture that fundamentally altered European history by preserving and disseminating classical knowledge to the Islamic world and then to Western Europe. Rome's influence continued into the modern era, even after the Renaissance. During the Enlightenment, political philosophers were motivated by its republican principles, which shaped the evolution of contemporary democratic administration. Roman ideas of citizenship, liberty, and civic virtue served as a direct inspiration for revolutionary revolutions in both Europe and America. As a result, Rome's impact persisted long after its political fall, helping to shape medieval and contemporary Europe. As a lasting bridge connecting the ancient world and modernity, its cultural, legal, political, and religious legacies endured deeply ingrained in European society. Even though Rome had fallen, its influence on history persisted, reverberating down the ages. Europe experienced the Renaissance, a spectacular era of cultural rebirth, following years of isolation and fragmentation throughout the Middle Ages. This period, which started in Italy in the 14th century, saw a significant revival of classical Greek and Roman philosophy, art, and humanistic ideals. Rome, which had long lost its political clout, saw a significant cultural comeback and regained its status as a key hub for creative and intellectual advancement. The finding of old Roman and Greek texts that Byzantine and Arab academics had saved served as a direct inspiration for the Renaissance, which means rebirth, and signified a return to traditional sources of knowledge. These unearthed books were enthusiastically examined by academics in Florence, Venice, and Rome, reigniting interest in classical science, literature, philosophy, and history. The Renaissance's intellectual core turned out to be humanism. Inspired by Roman thinkers like Cicero, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius, humanist scholars placed a strong emphasis on each person's inherent value, dignity, and potential. This human-centered worldview promoted new developments in politics, science education, and the arts, while challenging medieval notions that were exclusively oriented on religious theology. The intellectual traditions of ancient Rome served as the foundation for the Renaissance intellectuals' strong beliefs in reason observation and critical thinking. Rejuvenated by influential benefactors, particularly the Catholic Church, and affluent aristocratic families, Rome itself emerged as a key hub of the Renaissance. For example, Popes Julius II, 1503 to 1513, and Leo X, 1513 to 1521, made enormous investments in art architecture and cultural endeavors, drawing the best Renaissance artists. Michelangelo, Raphael, and Leonardo da Vinci were among the artists who traveled to Rome and produced works of art that were influenced by classical principles. The spirit of Roman creative brilliance and classical harmony was expressed by Michelangelo's ceiling frescoes in the Sistine Chapel, Raphael's exquisite paintings in the Vatican palaces, and Leonardo's inventive drawings. The Colosseum Pantheon and Roman Forum were among the ancient Roman ruins that directly inspired Renaissance painters to imitate the symmetry, grandeur, and proportion of classical architecture. Additionally, architects such as Michelangelo and Bramante redesigned Rome, turning it into a thriving metropolis, with the goal of creating the biggest and most magnificent cathedral in Christendom. Bramante started the enormous reconstruction of St. Peter's Basilica. Later on, Michelangelo worked on this project and created its famous dome. One of Rome's most recognizable structures today, it represents the blending of Renaissance creativity with traditional Roman architectural traditions. Rome's Renaissance encompassed more than just art. Scholars, poets, philosophers, and scientists were drawn to the city, creating a vibrant intellectual atmosphere. Humanist ideals proliferated throughout Europe. As a result of the expansion of universities, the growth of education, and the widespread distribution of ancient books by printing presses. The scientific revolution was made possible by the substantial advances in science, medicine, astronomy, and geography that were progressively spurred by this intellectual renaissance. But the Renaissance in Rome was complicated. Church discontent grew as a result of the high expenses of artistic patronage and large-scale building projects that were frequently financed by the sale of indulgences. The Protestant Reformation began in 1517 when German monk Martin Luther openly denounced ecclesiastical corruption. Rome's ecclesiastical authority was seriously contested by this religious movement, which changed Christianity and irrevocably split Europe along religious lines. Rome's cultural renaissance persisted, however, and had a lasting impression on European history. The Renaissance was more than just a period of intellectual and artistic renewal. It represented Europe's return to its Roman roots and the reclamation of historic values and customs that profoundly influenced European identity. Rome once more influenced and led European civilization throughout the Renaissance. Its ancient heritage was resurrected in science, philosophy, and art, paving the way for contemporary Europe and beyond. Resurrected, the Old City became a timeless representation of human success, ingenuity, and cultural genius, influencing future generations all over the world. Rome's history continued to influence the new worlds being found over the oceans as Europe transitioned from the Renaissance into the 15th and 16th centuries of exploration. Rome was no longer an imperial state, but her customs, laws, and philosophies had a significant impact on European colonists, explorers, and empires influencing world history. Driven by a resurgence of classical geography and mapping, European explorers such as Vasco da Gama, Ferdinand Magellan, and Christopher Columbus ventured into uncharted oceans, partially aided by charts and techniques derived from ancient Greek and Roman expertise. Roman methods of meticulous record-keeping, methodical observation, and in-depth geographic research had a significant impact. The maps created by Renaissance cartographers served as the basis for European exploratory expeditions. European explorers found societies quite unlike to their own in the Americas. However, there were clear remnants of Roman law government and urban design in the colonial colonies founded by Spain, Portugal, France, and England. From Mexico City to Lima, Quebec, and later North American towns like Boston and Philadelphia, colonial cities frequently adopted the Roman style of grid-based street plans, central plazas, and civic structures. Roman architecture combined classical beauty with modern invention to create colonial buildings like as churches, government buildings, and colleges. The legal systems of the colonies were also really influenced by Roman legal customs. While English common law, despite its differences, nevertheless included many Roman ideas, particularly with relation to property rights contracts and citizenship, Spain and Portugal developed laws that were directly based on Roman principles. These Roman-derived legal concepts eventually served as the cornerstones of the legal frameworks that emerged in North and South America. As Christianity spread throughout the world under the leadership of European missionaries, Roman religious influence remained through the establishment of mission schools and churches that became essential institutions throughout the continent. Roman Catholicism, which was heavily influenced by Rome's traditions, expanded quickly throughout Latin America. The major languages of most of the New World Spanish, Portuguese, and French were likewise impacted by the Latin of Rome, from early democratic institutions based on Roman republican principles, to viceroys and governors standing in for faraway monarchs. Colonial government systems were politically impacted by Rome's republican and imperial models. Roman ideas of liberty, republicanism, and civic virtue were potent sources of inspiration as colonies' demands for independence and self-government grew. Notably, in their fight for independence from Britain in the 18th century, American colonists specifically referenced Roman republican traditions. In order to intentionally shape America's new republic, after the Roman Republic, founding fathers, including James Madison, Benjamin Franklin, and Thomas Jefferson, diligently studied Roman history. Roman classical architecture served as a direct inspiration for architectural icons like the U.S. Capitol, Jefferson's Monticello, and the White House itself, signifying America's strong ties to Roman principles. Similar to this, revolutionary leaders in South America, such as Simon Bolivar, sought to create autonomous republics free from colonial control by emulating the Roman values of liberty, civic responsibility, and public morality. As a result, Rome's influence kept growing throughout the world for centuries after her empire fell. Roman law, customs, governance principles, architecture, and cultural values were brought into completely uncharted territory throughout the era of discovery, permanently influencing world culture. Despite the political decline of ancient Rome, its customs and beliefs have endured as pillars of contemporary communities worldwide, connecting the past to the present and future, and reverberating across history as civilizations have developed, grown, and changed. Europe began the era of Enlightenment in the 17th and 18th centuries, a time characterized by scientific advancement, intellectual curiosity, and revolutionary political ideas. Once more, the philosophers, intellectuals, and revolutionaries who aimed to establish a society founded on reason, liberty, and civic virtue found great inspiration in ancient Rome. John Locke Montesquieu and Jean-Jacques Rousseau were among the enlightened thinkers who studied ancient Rome in great detail. They focused on its republican institutions, its ideas about citizenship, and its stress on justice and the rule of law. The concept of separation of powers between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, which form the cornerstone of contemporary democratic governments, was memorably articulated by Montesquieu, who praised Rome's balanced governance. Rome's impact was evident during the American Revolution, when its founders openly based their new country on Roman republican principles. People who studied Roman history, philosophy, and governance included George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, and Alexander Hamilton. They viewed ancient Rome as a powerful example of civic virtue, republican administration, and selflessness for the benefit of society, in addition to serving as a warning against empire and tyranny. The founders of America purposefully used Roman components in their new system of governance. In keeping with Roman republican tradition, the U.S. Senate was purposefully created as a body of seasoned, knowledgeable leaders and was named after Rome's Senate. Government structures like the Capitol, the Supreme Court, and Jefferson's Monticello were all based on Roman temples, arches, and public areas, demonstrating the new American Republic's acceptance of Roman classicism in public architecture. Roman principles also had a significant role in the French Revolution of 1789, which took place across the Atlantic. The Roman values of liberty, equality before the law, and civic responsibility were highly regarded by revolutionary leaders. Roman traditions of liberty even influenced the iconography of revolution, such as the Phrygian hat worn by French revolutionaries. However, revolutionaries and enlightened intellectuals also took Rome's cautions seriously. They were well conscious of the Roman Republic's transformation into an empire and an autocrat. As lessons for contemporary political leaders and cultures historians such as Edward Gibbon, author of the well-known History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, offered in-depth examinations of Rome's mistakes, political corruption, moral degradation, and unbridled imperial ambition. During the 18th and 19th centuries, democratic reform efforts in Britain were also impacted by Roman republican principles. Roman-derived ideas like representative democracy, the rule of law, and individual rights were central to European political growth. Rome's impact extended beyond philosophy and politics. The scientific and intellectual developments of the Enlightenment were greatly influenced by the classical Roman ideal of reason and methodical investigation. The basis for contemporary scientific methodology was laid by intellectuals who sought reason, observation, and empirical knowledge, motivated by Roman writers such as Pliny and Lucretius. Thus, Enlightenment and revolutionary ideas were significantly influenced by Rome's heritage. It provided principles, cautions, and enduring illustrations of civic virtue, fairness, and the rule of law that helped steer Europe and America through significant social and political change. Ancient Rome continued to inspire and teach long after its own political demise, impacting the core tenets of contemporary democratic institutions and philosophy. Rome's historic voice reverberated loudly as the Enlightenment gave rise to new nations, liberties, and ideologies directing human society toward a future molded by liberty, reason, and the everlasting strength of civic virtue. Despite its historical distance, Rome has never really disappeared and will always be a part of the contemporary world. Rome's influence persisted in having a genuine impact on the contemporary world throughout the years that followed the Enlightenment and revolutions of the 18th and 19th century. Its influence shaped the modern world and persisted not just in politics and the law, but also profoundly in language, architecture, culture, and even daily life. Rome left behind an especially potent political legacy. Roman traditions, such as the separation of powers, representative democracy, and the rule of law, are directly incorporated into contemporary democratic republics and constitutional governments worldwide. The political systems of the United States, France, and several other countries are specifically founded on ideas taken from the ancient Roman model, sincerely derived from Roman heritage ideas like citizenship, individual rights, legal equality, and public service continue to be fundamental to contemporary administration. Rome has had an equally significant impact on the legal profession. Many modern legal systems are based on Roman law, especially Justinian's legal code. Roman jurisprudence greatly influenced legal systems throughout Europe, Latin America, and portions of Africa and Asia. These ideas included contracts, property rights, trial by jury, and civil law. Latin legal terms like habeas corpus pro bono and status quo are still used in courtrooms and legal texts all across the world today. Modern landscapes are still shaped by Roman engineering and construction. Roman architecture frequently echoes classical columns, arches, domes, and symmetry in public buildings, ranging from courthouses and government buildings to museums, universities, and libraries. Rome's classical architectural legacy is proudly reflected in iconic structures such as the British Museum, the U.S. Capitol, and innumerable municipal halls worldwide. Rome is even credited with influencing contemporary urban development. Roman inventions, such as carefully planned street grids, public squares, parks, bridges, roadways, and sewage systems, established norms that still influence urban planning today. Roman concrete transformed contemporary building methods, and ancient Roman aqueducts served as an inspiration for contemporary water delivery systems. Rome has left a rich literary and linguistic legacy. Romance languages, which are spoken by hundreds of millions of people today, including French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian, were greatly affected by Latin, the official language of Rome. Thousands of Latin-derived terms and idioms were absorbed by English despite its Germanic origins, which enhanced its lexicon and shaped its personality. Numerous writers, philosophers, and artists have been influenced by Roman literature, philosophy, poetry, and rhetoric, which are now studied in great detail in colleges across the world. Rome has a rich cultural legacy that permeates popular culture as well. Roman mythology, history, and culture are frequently re-examined in literature, film, and television. Popular television shows and films ranging from Hollywood epics like Gladiator and Ben-Hur to Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, as well as stories about emperors, gladiators, philosophers, and soldiers, all contribute to the public's fascination with Roman history. Rome's influence is still seen in sports. Ancient Rome's love of competition, athletic success, and public entertainment is echoed in stadiums, arenas, and spectator sports, ranging from soccer matches to Olympic Games. These venues incorporate characteristics of Roman amphitheaters and sporting events. Rome's ideals may have had the greatest enduring impact. Discussions regarding government morals and society are still influenced by Roman ideas of citizenship, virtue, justice, duty, and civic responsibility. Roman Stoic philosophers who promoted reason, emotional fortitude, and moral behavior are still relevant in contemporary self-improvement movements, therapy, and philosophy. Rome is therefore still very much alive in the modern world in a variety of ways. Across continents, its lasting influences language, architecture, politics, law, and society. Even though it has long since collapsed, the ancient city still has a significant impact on our lives, demonstrating the everlasting nature of its principles, ideals, and achievements. Rome, the everlasting city, genuinely persists because it is deeply ingrained in the fundamental framework of our worldly society. As we come to the close of our lengthy and gentle exploration of Roman history, we take another moment to consider the peaceful yet significant contribution Rome has made to the globe. Born of tradition, bravery, sorrow, and hope, the everlasting city was modestly established on a little hill beside the gently flowing Tiber. Rome developed from a little village into one of the greatest civilizations in history via centuries of ups and downs, victories and setbacks. An empire that continues to have a slight influence on our planet today. Rome imparted to humanity important knowledge about justice, government, and the rule of law. The ancient Romans imagined a society where everyone was subject to the same rules. Citizenship came with rights and obligations, and civic virtue united people in regard for one another. These principles are being gently upheld today in contemporary legal, democratic, and governmental structures, constantly serving as a reminder of Rome's peaceful wisdom. Rome also shown to us how education, art, and culture enhance human life. Rome gave humanity a lasting appreciation of elegance, balance, and aesthetic harmony, which is seen in everything from the Colosseum's imposing arches to the delicate grace of Renaissance paintings influenced by Roman beauty. Roman philosophy, theater, and poetry continue to subtly influence literature, art, and thinking, inspiring younger generations to delve into life's profound and enduring issues. Most importantly, perhaps Rome's subtle legacy serves as a constant reminder of the conflict between might and compassion, ambition and humility. Rome had both triumphs and setbacks throughout its history, with its triumphs being balanced by lessons gained from adversity. Its past gently urges nations toward wisdom, moderation, and introspection, while cautioning us about the perils of overwhelming pride, corruption, and unbridled power. Humanity learned adaptability and resilience from Rome's final collapse and conversion into medieval kingdoms, which demonstrated how civilizations change, converge, and rejuvenate throughout time. Rome's tale sensitively illustrates how change, even when difficult, presents chances for development, rebirth, and rediscovery. We may feel the gentle force of history when we travel to Rome today and stroll around the ancient ruins while admiring structures that have remained peacefully for millennia. We have a peaceful connection to the past while standing beneath Roman arches, columns, and domes, and it becomes evident to us how much our own world has been influenced by those who came before us. under the stars that the Romans themselves once adored in the gentle silence of the night, we pause to consider the timeless issues that Rome raises. What sustains a civilization? How can we create a society founded on empathy, understanding, and justice? How can we strike a balance between compassion and power, advancement and humility? Rome skillfully reminds us that the solutions are found in the quiet wisdom of careful consideration, common humanity, and responsible action, rather than just in force or conquest. Rome's everlasting history lingers in our minds as we shut our eyes and drift slowly into sleep. It serves as a serene reminder of our common human journey, which is full of tragedy and victory, hope and sorrow, aspirations realized and lessons learnt. The history of Rome slowly leads us to a better comprehension of the world ourselves and the peaceful bonds that unite all people throughout history. Therefore, we bid old Rome good night under a faint canopy of stars, knowing that its peaceful teachings, insight, and dreams will always be with us, subtly pointing mankind in the direction of a better, more intelligent, and more caring future.